you've heard this morning and into this early afternoon, if you had to identify the thing we need to talk about, the thing that's urgent, what would it be?
Well, actually, I would agree that we have to have a combination of class and race and gender, emancipation. And, if we have a look only on structural issues, we have to admit that there is moments that we have a true crisis and that it's not only politics of fear on a narrative basis.
Okay.
So if we see 20% of the German children living beyond the poverty rate, 30% of women who are raising their kids alone, I don't know what word you have for that in English. In German it's called alleinerziehende Mütter.
Single parenthood?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
30% of them living beyond the poverty rate. 800,000 people being homeless in this country. So we really have real problems to address. And one person, I think John said this morning, it's not all about migration. But the topic that is driving us in all debates seems to be migration, the sole and single issue, but it's not. So we have to decover where it's not about migration and talk about it when it's really about migration.
Migration, though, and anyone's welcome to disagree, it seems to be a good way to create wedge politics, to advance political agendas. It's simple, it's available. Bernhard, is that not how it's being played out all around Europe now?
Well, being a lawyer, I think we don't focus enough on procedure. We have 4 different categories of migrants. We have asylum seekers, we have refugees, we have those who are tolerated, and those who just want to immigrate. And we have different procedures, and these procedures can take forever, years, before it's decided whether the person can stay in Germany or has to go back. And these years are not only lost years, they are years in which alienation grows, in which skepticism grows, in which hostility sometimes grows. And on the one hand, we think we bless them by opening another procedure, another court, and another higher court for them to pursue their agenda. And at the same time, the end result is often the same as the first result already was. And it's the rule of law in this case with these different instances is a curse more than a blessing. And I think we have to come to a procedure that is fast and gets an end result, and then those who can stay here really know they can stay here, and they get jobs, and they become part of our civil society.
But is the issue of migration being overemphasized for political reasons? Seriously.
There are all these other structural challenges, but the parties, the AfD manages to turn these other into our single mothers have such a hard time because all the money goes to the migrants.
I see.
So they turn it around that it becomes a migration issue, even it's not necessarily one.
Okay. As you said, actually, as I lived actually all my life as a refugee, I was a refugee in Syria, Palestinian refugee, and then I am again a refugee in Germany. I spent more than 2 years in many different camps, and I faced the struggle actually with the authorities, with public offices actually, with the job center, with the Ausländerbehörde, with the BAMF. They all have one category for all of us, We are the new people. If we are migrants, refugees, they treat us all the same, which is not a good way actually.
As you can see in the program, I chose to identify from my traditional territory, so Treaty 10 territory in northern Canada. So I'm Indigenous. I'm one of Canada's first peoples. Dene is my community, my language. And the reason, so traditionally, when we come to a new place, we always identify the territory that we're on, and then we always identify ourselves from where we come from. And I think this idea of the inside, the outside, it was really interesting for me kind of throughout the morning and hearing the conversation evolve, particularly with the narrative of what Canada is in terms of being this diverse, inclusive nation. As an Indigenous person who, my ancestors have been in what's now called North America, what we refer to as Turtle Island, for thousands of years. Canada has come a long way, but also has a very dark history. So while I think, the rest of the world kind of holds up Canada as this diverse and inclusive nation, Indigenous peoples have a very different experience. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that it was the policy of the Canadian government for over 100 years to assimilate Indigenous peoples, that they didn't want us to speak our language, that they didn't want us to practice our culture, that having someone like Josh come out here and do his traditional dance, at one point in time that was illegal and outlawed today. So for me, this idea of being an outsider, I myself as an Indigenous person have been fighting for a sense of belonging on my own land.
As part of my work, I run a program that is called Disruption Network Lab. So I work a lot on the discourse of disruption. That means, in a sense, to interfere with systems from the inside, to try to open up these systems and investigate what is the problem inside the system. So we have been also working a lot with whistleblowers in our conferences, and it's difficult to compare refugees and whistleblowers, but I think there are some points in common that perhaps would also help to understand better this discourse around the conflict and around the responsibility that also we have, because a whistleblower is also somebody that comes from inside the system. So speaking about inside and outside, is a person that goes outside and tries to make us see this system from another perspective, revealing the misconduct and the bugs of the system itself. And I think what the newcomers or refugees are also doing is a great challenge and a great, I would say, is something that is bringing to society an advantage, because in this sense we can see society differently.
Actually, I'm working at Humboldt University, and I'm heading an institute on migration and integration studies there. We did a lot of surveys, population surveys here in Germany, asking people about their idea on diversity, on inclusion, on religion, on citizenship, on Germanness. And we asked them to describe what this German we was. Actually, we could see that on the one side, there is a real and huge open-mindedness, like more than 90% would say a German person is a person who owns the German citizenship. And then another like 80% would say, well, a German is a person, in order to be German, you have to speak German, you have to own the citizenship. So this is very modern perspectives on citizenship and nationhood. Have that here, this is the cognitive approach, but then asking back, we could see that another 40%, which is a really high number, would say, well, actually, you only can be a real German if you have German ancestries. So this is then very much connected to blood and the idea of history, and is not open at all. And then another 40% would say, well, actually, it's not enough to speak German. You have to speak German without an accent. So Germanness and Muslimness seem to be two totally contradictory pieces in this society. People don't have in mind that being German and being Muslim can be one thing at the same time. In fact, this idea, and this is what we meant by exclusionary we, this we is very much seen as an homogeneous we, which does not include minorities.
A monoculture.
Living a long time in camps, I felt how people feel that they, even with the refugees, we sometimes say we and them. We don't feel the inclusion, actually, until now. After 3 years, after 4 years, we still say we and them.
Who's the them?
Sometimes I ask my friend, like, who are them? And sometimes they are the German, sometimes they are the foreigners, sometimes they are any other non-Muslim people, So this is really a serious problem, and we feel all of the time like targeted.
I think identity is so much in flux, and even the we you are talking about is obviously in flux. So I think we deal with so many different confrontations and inclusions, and we should accept this openness. And with some it takes longer, and with some it goes faster.
In Germany, we count the migration background up to the 3rd generation, which is totally different to other countries, where after the 2nd generation, you lose this category. I know
True for the United States, the Irish community, the Latino community in the United States, that goes over generations.
I just mean it now in terms of law. Okay, in terms of law, you have these statutes in the German statistic, in the microcensus, you have these statutes carrying on until the 3rd generation. In other countries, you lose it after the 2nd. We have to be clear that a person can checklist all these parts and still not being accepted because of his phenotype, because of this person being a racialized other. And this is what in the minds of the people is not, they think you have to do something in order to get integrated. They do not reflect it back that this is something about ourselves, about our perspective of Germanness. And,
but in the end, what the big elephant in every room is when we talk about migration is that the worth of an individual is not to be earned, but is there.
And I think one of the problems in Germany is that Germany denies of having racism in the society. We don't accept the cultural and religious dimension of racism, and I think this is a big problem.
When you talk about things get better over time, I'm like, we've been here already for so long, and it's a complete lie to say that if you get integrated, things will get better, so please do not sacrifice yourself. I absolutely agree with you, and none of the newcomers who are coming now, please don't do that, because we have been already through this, and it hurts to say this, but yes, you can also be here for decades and you're still not going to be considered a German.
But then I feel, the people should be empowered to be what they are, because I'm sure that many of people that are coming here from many countries, many of them are experts, they know many things. So I also feel that this idea of being German, because you speak the language that you also were mentioning, is something that brings you a bit down on the level of acceptance of even yourself. And I think even if this is important, we should all try to advocate for accepting people for the expertise that they have and encouraging people to use it.
I just want to mention something that works. And a friend of mine started it, I'm somewhat involved in it, biography conversations. It started with 8 or 9 East Germans and West Germans meeting over a weekend, and everybody told his biography. And the others could ask if they didn't understand something, but no critical question. They just had to listen. One sat around in the evening, and then one could also ask something critical, but first one had just to listen. And then he expanded it. He did it with, and does it with German and Turks, or Germans and Poles, and it has expanded ever more. And just listening to the other makes an enormous difference. And I remember the one Turk who was in tears, no German ever had listened to me before.
In indigenous communities, our elders are our wisdom keepers. And an elder once told me that the strength of who we are as indigenous peoples comes from the fact that we speak from our hearts, and that for thousands of years we've passed down our traditional knowledge, history, and culture through our stories. And so what I've seen work most effectively in kind of building these bridges or kind of creating the space of reconciliation has been being able to share the stories, and such that when indigenous peoples talk, or when a different community talks, make the space for them to listen, or make the space for them to be heard. And that kind of goes to this idea of let's just talk to one another.
I have been here for 3 years. I have never been asked from any public sector that what you need, what you actually need. I'm always told that I should do so and so. But no one ever asked me or asked our refugee community, what do you really need? I work for SINGA Business Lab, which is an inclusive incubator for newcomer entrepreneurs. So we give the chance to anyone who is new in the town, who is a refugee, who is a migrant, to build his business. And we should actually highlight the numbers about the entrepreneurship in Germany. Like, I don't know if you know, 44% of new startups are registered by foreign passports. And
Everybody has skills and aptitudes and things to bring, everybody, without exception. And part of the solution surely is just recognizing it and supporting it and not viewing those people as primarily a problem as opposed to an opportunity.
Because I have learned in the past 10 years, I'm doing empirical studies, I can have the best numbers. If I enter rooms that are totally full of racism and stereotypes, you can never cut these rooms through with numbers.
I think what you say is really important, but so what are the solutions?
So I know your numbers, and then I think connect your story. This is the first part, knowing your numbers. Then connecting your story. Like, we know that we can connect effectively the story of refugees here to the story of refugees from the 1949 time coming into this country. We can connect stories to personal experiences of other people. This is the second part. And then the third part would say, find your allies. So learn your numbers, connect your story, and find your allies. I think this can work, and we have a lot of civil society members who work with this tool set now in Germany.